This week on MS Refresh, Microsoft Inspire 2022 introduced a number of Microsoft 365 features brand new, including another Viva module that's basically just adding a brand to an existing brand, Classic Viva. Plus, our thoughts on the announcements and what to expect. All that and more, this is the MS Refresh Show. Hi there, and welcome to the Matt and Sean 365 Refresh Show. This is episode 67 for the work week of July 27th, 2022, and our annual recap of Inspire, Microsoft's partner conference in name only. Coming to you from the West Coast, my name is Sean Bugler.
And from the East Coast, my name is Matt Wade.
Matt Wade, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You know, I had an opportunity to kind of deep dive. I didn't get to watch Inspire live, as I imagine almost nobody.
I have a real job, right? Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you and I had the same sentiment. Because you texted me. Did Inspire start yesterday?
Oops! Can't give away my secrets, man. That's way too much behind the scenes.
Oh, but yeah, the only reason I knew it all was, I mean, we knew it was coming. We've alluded to it in multiple episodes. It just didn't seem like it was then. It didn't seem like it was now.
Yeah.
The only reason I knew is because a couple of the announcements that Microsoft made broke into the mainstream just so the tech media could make fun of them.
That's not fair.
Which, hey, I don't make the rules. That's that's the zeitgeist for you.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about the news here. But before we do that, just kind of a refresh on our schedule. For those of you who are just jumping in after a while, we recently redid our cadence with respect to the refresh structure. And this is this is the last week of the month. So this is either the Power Platform Showcase or special event coverage, which is exactly what we're doing here as special event coverage. Is the Power Platform we've seen here from the view count. Some of you love it. Some of you questionable. And I just want to say to all of you who are questionable, you're wrong.
It has a huge user base out there. It's just whether or not people know to be like looking for centralized information, or they just, got their heads deep into their Power Apps, or they're building their Westworld chatbot to take over the world.
Well, have you been watching?
Yes, it's amazing.
No spoilers.
It's by far the best season since season 1.
I couldn't agree more. That's for those of you who haven't watched Westworld. Dystopian, dark, fantastic.
Yep, definitely.
So with no further ado, ready to get into the news?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. This is the news. A number of announcements that were made at Microsoft Inspire just this past week, starting with Excel Live, the ability to share an Excel file during a Teams meeting, and everyone in the meeting can edit it, live. This supports sheet views, so each person can be sorting and filtering without impacting others. The permissions aspect appears to be fully based on OneDrive and SharePoint permissions, unsurprisingly. So if you have external participants in the call, it looks like you'll need external access enabled in your tenant in order to take advantage of the feature. It also doesn't appear to have any connection to the role of the meeting participant, so presenter versus attendee. It does appear to share the existing file, which is not really how PowerPoint Live works. So that's good. It means they're thinking about how this is actually supposed to be implemented in the long term. This is a natural progression from PowerPoint Live from last year and the live share feature announced recently at Microsoft Build. But it does bring up the question of whether we're getting Word Live, which is obviously the most asked for, followed by subsequently Publisher Live and Access Live. Sarcasm. Excel Live is due for public preview in August. A link to the announcement is in the show notes below. Jumping over to collaborative annotations, another new feature. Building on the live Teams meeting experience, collaborative annotations were also highlighted, which will let participants in a meeting annotate on top of a shared screen or window, providing the standard toolset that comes with Microsoft Whiteboard. This includes things like markers, highlighters, text, shapes, emoji, most important, and participant cursors. The presenter will be able to choose whether or not they can sketch or if anyone can. No word on whether the sketched content is saved, but it's definitely a nice improvement for Teams meetings. The roadmap says this is currently rolling out to all clouds, including, wait for it, GCC clouds, although the due date is June, so I guess buyer beware. Jumping over to Viva Engage. The Viva ecosystem is like a herd of rabbits these days. As more and more modules break off and pop up out of nowhere, seriously, not as fluffy, but clearly as potent, the Viva family grows again. Right after gaining sales and goals, both new Viva modules at the recent Microsoft Build conference, Inspire announced Viva Engage, which is essentially a rebrand of the Communities app in Teams and Outlook, which itself was just a very specific name for Yammer, only when it's accessed in Teams or Outlook. That said, it's not just a brand that was announced. There's also a lot more features for Yammer, and you thought the year of Yammer was in the past. You couldn't be more wrong. This one will excite some people, but will lead to the rolliest of eye rolls for others, in what The Verge called, quote, a Facebook ripoff inside Teams, end quote. A Yammer profile does look a lot more like a Facebook profile. What's more is Viva Engage is getting stories, like Instagram stories or TikTok stories, or I guess they just call them TikToks. Oh God, I'm old. Is your organization ready for that level of cringe? We'll find out soon enough. Engage will be available to all licenses that already have Yammer, because that's what it is. Yammer News. Teams webinars are getting a scrub that will make the marketing aspect of a webinar a lot better, including presenter bios, theming, new fields that can be displayed on the webinar page, and capacity limits, and custom questions, which appear to be just the standard Q&A app that was recently released seen through the context of the webinar experience. Expect to see more of these new features in public preview in August. More details are in a link available in the show notes below. And lastly, the ability to send a video clip in chat. This is newly announced at Microsoft Inspire. This is a feature that will allow you to send a quick video recording directly in a Teams chat. This is similar to the way that most modern messaging tools work, like iMessage, Facebook Messenger, another Facebook message feature stolen by the Microsoft team. And that's the news.
That was the news.
Very nicely done.
I have a question for you.
Oh, shoot. Let's hear it.
Microsoft Build is a partner conference. So, I mean, we're talking like MSPs, service providers, companies that, get contracted out by other companies to kind of manage their Microsoft 365 experience. What? These announcements, did they feel partnery? Do you feel like these are like partner specific things, or has Microsoft Build just become another surface for Microsoft to announce features in a I think jazzy way?
I think each of the conferences now that they are all online first since the pandemic started has become sort of a de facto opportunity to announce features regardless. I think it's also an opportunity to double dip. We didn't cover all the double dips, shared channels, emoji options in reactions and Teams, the Q&A app, things like that either are out there or are coming like very soon. It's like, why waste everybody's time? That's we already know that that's coming in theory. And I think that's where this is kind of gone. There were a couple of specific articles about partner, context updates from Inspire. And I did see a couple specific features that they mentioned. So Teams apps will now have the ability for you to purchase in-app services.
Which is very partner friendly.
That is very partner friendly, but only partners that make custom Teams apps, right? There are lots of partners out there that don't do that and never will. But I don't so much work in this field anymore, so it doesn't bother me so much. I am interested in seeing Microsoft take a stand on when things will be available or what new features are coming, especially these days as some of these things get added like on, July 15th to the roadmap and they come to the actual tenants on July, 17th, right? So
right,
getting a little bit of early information about something is helpful.
I appreciate your thoughts on that. Yeah, I think that this has become, Microsoft has had to kind of reevaluate what the marketing machine looks like. And I think we've seen this evolve notably over the last 2 years, I think, with COVID, they've really kind of gotten their hands around digital production in a way that, I mean, they were always good at digital production, but now they're great at it.
Were they though?
No, they weren't. I'm being generous. They are really good now.
I agree that they're really good now.
They were functional before. I think
the in-person conferences were very high value. It was very high fidelity in person, but there wasn't really much of a standard for how public-facing content was done. Now, was there like a brand standard?
Way of saying it.
Sure, but the AV aspect of it was very different. They didn't use these studios and even special effects or just graphics that open and close and chyrons and just dumb little things that like your local news channel have had standardized for decades. But now they have a need for it, and I'm happy to see that, because now as conferences move into being more in person, they'll still do these things online, I think, because you have hundreds of millions of customers out there that can watch online and only tens of thousands that can come in person. Who do you want to hit more? I would think the hundreds of millions, from my viewpoint.
Yeah, I would think so. I think you're probably right on the money there. Pivoting to the news, specifically the live experiences. It's really nice to see those come to life. They had talked about, and I think they had talked about it before, these live share experiences, these live apps that you can, share experiences without having to share your screen. Kind of the natural evolution of sharing a file, just uploading a file into a Teams meeting and having that display for everybody. This is that natural next step. It's nice to see them bring to life another app, because it seemed like for the longest time they were just content to live with just PowerPoint Live. What do you think? Is this going to have value, Excel Live, and any of these live experiences? Is that going to have value from your perspective?
So I think it will for those users that don't really know how to use Teams and sharing files to begin with that well. PowerPoint Live, the one feature it's missing, which I believe has been announced. I thought I heard a rumor or saw something on Twitter where it had been announced that there will be the ability to share a PowerPoint slideshow, but then edit it live while you're doing it, which I think is kind of powerful, because right now if you share, you're basically taking a screenshot in time, or a snapshot in time of that PowerPoint file. So if you want to make edits, you have to make edits to the source file and then reshare it, which is, fine. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it is kind of annoying if you're, PowerPoint is really meant to, PowerPoint Live at least, is really meant to provide a way to share slides that give more feature sets, because like you can click hyperlinks, you can share control of the slides going back and forth, but also it's significantly lower in the amount of bandwidth that the tool uses, that the meeting uses. So a lot of people will share a whole screen just to show PowerPoint slides. Like, what's the point of that? But in some cases, there is a point, because you may want to make updates to a table of deliverables that, I didn't realize that that's going to be due, or that's going to be done next month instead of this month, right? I'd like to be able to do that without taking up all that bandwidth. Excel, on the other hand, with co-authoring and being able to provide the link to a file in a chat, or even a link on a, let's say a slide or something, you can all be editing that anyway, right? So I think this is going to be useful for those people that don't necessarily see that as obvious, because I get questions all the time from people on, if I share a file in a chat, does that share it like it does PowerPoint? It's like, well, no, you're sharing a file. It's like, right, but that's what I do when I use the PowerPoint share in a Teams meeting. It's like, yeah, all right, I see what you mean. Like, you have to kind of know that those are there's a fork in the road there, that one is a presentation and the other is like a collaboration, and those concepts aren't obvious to some people. So it will help with those. But if I'm working with a bunch of people on an Excel spreadsheet and I want to work together with them, I would generally present my screen and show what I'm doing and give them access to the file so they can see where I am, and they can make the edits locally without having without having to see mine, but they can if they want to, if they need to stay within context. So I actually kind of prefer the method that I already use, but for a lot of people who don't know that sort of subtle difference between sharing a file in a chat and then saying, here, open it up and edit it, versus putting it on the screen and doing the edits, I think it's going to be helpful. Their article actually said something along the lines of like, now you don't have to just be the one person sharing an Excel file so that everybody else can see it, but they can't do anything. And it's like, but you can already do all of that. You're making, like, they made a statement that wasn't true, basically, to justify the marketing aspect of this feature. And it's like, it'll help a lot of people, but it doesn't need to necessarily.
Yeah. I will say that increasingly over the last 2.5 years of working virtually, one of the things that I've experienced that was kind of aligned with what Microsoft said in their marketing there was, I hate being the only person that's got the file up. That I've opened it up. I'm the only person that knows where it lives. I'm sharing my screen, and there's this presenter fatigue, in a sense, that I'm carrying the weight of this meeting.
Yeah, that's true.
By being the person who shared my screen and to show a file, everybody else is like, oh well, this is Sean's got this.
Yeah.
And I think this idea of the live experience creates a bit more of a sense of shared ownership, hopefully. So I'm optimistic that could open up some possible doors. Interesting that they went for Excel on this one and not Word. Because I don't know about you, but does Excel strike you as a collaborative experience? Like, do you think, like, Excel to me is, and maybe this is just my personal experience, a thing where I'm like, I have to build 30 pivot tables and a couple of macros and some complex index and matches. So I go hole up in my closet. I turn off all the lights. I throw a blanket over my head and I hunch over and I just do my Excel stuff.
Yep.
I've never really thought about Excel as being a thing that we do together. What's your take on that?
I would argue that you are probably a small percentage of Excel users from that perspective. Maybe not 5%, but maybe 20%. Whereas most people, I think, typically use an Excel file to track a list of things that they can sort and filter. And that's even considered, somewhat high end. And I think a lot of people use it as a project management tool. So I know I see Excel files being brought up in meetings all the time when people are tracking deliverables, statuses, owners, things like that. And they want to share the file so that we can see it and go from there. You're right. The pivot table use case, that's definitely a one-off person doing that thing. But with Word, so my experience with Word generally is I write something, I send it for review. We're not really collaborating on the review. They're just going to do their track changes, their comments. If we're doing we're writing a, let's say, communication or something together,
right,
then sure, definitely that would be super useful. But I do see much more of a Word kind of comes up in the more personal perspective because I'm writing something, reviewing something, or I'm the owner of the file after the review and we're discussing comments and I don't need to have 5 different versions of the thing showing with all those people at the same time.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So a lot of interesting news came out of this, but I think probably not the most interesting, but something that caught all of our attention was another Viva module. And they seem to, it's funny because the names are so similar in theme, like thematically, that you have to question yourself and go like, did they announce this? Have I heard this one before?
So I have to show this for a second. Give me one moment. The screenshot that came from one of the presentations here on the different modules. So Engage is the new one, right? And that's Yammer, just Yammer in a wrapper in Teams, essentially, or apparently Outlook as well. Although I'm not sure how many people are going to go to these Viva modules through Outlook. But each of these has a title, right? Viva Learning, Viva Topics, Viva Goals, Viva Sales, and each one of them has a little tagline or descriptor. Can we take a look real quick at Connections and Engage? What does that say, Sean?
Connections, community and connections. Engage, community and connections.
So they couldn't even separate the descriptor of Viva Connections and Viva Engage. Now, whether or not that was an error and somebody just did the copy paste and whatever, or they really couldn't come up with a different descriptor. But if you can't even describe it differently, what's the point of having a different brand?
I'll take a look at Learning and Topics.
Learning and Topics. Oh, you're right. I didn't even notice that one. You're absolutely right. Knowledge and learning. Huh. I'm surprised why they didn't.
But to your point,
yeah, exactly.
This is if marketing isn't even differentiating them, and maybe it's deliberate. Maybe like these are thematically aligned with this kind of effort. But you would think, especially with a graphic like that, the idea here is to create some sort of differentiation that helps a customer like us who is overwhelmed with the fact that we went from 4 to 8, or however many there are now. That you got to help us out, Microsoft. Like, not everybody is paying attention as close as we are, and we're trying to parse this for other people.
Right. So this one is interesting because Engage is literally just Yammer being renamed from the Communities app in Teams, and the Communities app,
which was already confusing.
Right.
I don't know, I'm sure you remember, a year ago ish, we made predictions for the year. And I think one of my like big bombastic things was, I think that the Yammer brand is not long for this world. I saw the Communities branding in Teams, and I was like, yeah, it seems like they're obfuscating this for the purposes of juicing engagement, because people have kind of written off Yammer, the brand, in a lot of organizations. Sorry, Yammer. A lot of people have written it off because they're familiar with what Yammer was. And, you know, to their credit, there's a lot of really cool enhancements and functionalities and features. In fact, somebody from the Yammer team, if I remember correctly, jumped into the comments of that episode and said Yammer's not going anywhere. I don't know. I think this kind of proves out what I was talking about, which is they don't want this to be a separate branded experience, except through the lens of, I guess, Viva Engage. That they want to just have this be this native experience built into the Teams experience, and the Outlook experience is just kind of this Microsoft Facebook.
Yeah. So
what's your take?
I was really interested in reading the comments on the announcement for Viva Engage.
There were a lot of comments.
There were. And if you were to drop them in a word cloud, it would probably come up with the words, "What about Yammer?" And that right there tells you that this is confusing. Now, I've historically been not thrilled with Viva. It just adds another layer of complexity to a system that's already complex and does not need to be more complex. This one was more interesting to me because not only were they asking about what happens to the Yammer brand, is Yammer dead? And the very clear answer to that is no, Yammer remains. You will go into your, it has an app. You can go into like downloadable app, installable app. You can get to it from the Microsoft 365 homepage and the app launcher. It is an app. It's not called Viva Engage from there. It's still called Yammer. But the thing was that people were asking whether or not Yammer was now going to be put behind a paywall through the Viva licensing. And that statement right there, well, that statement right there, when people are asking that, they're assuming that Viva is its own license type, but it's not, right? Each of those modules basically pull in a service that it's available elsewhere. I don't think there's any one that's not an example. Learning maybe, but still, like that could have just been an app in Teams, right? There's no reason it has to be called Viva. Like Polls, right? Polls is an app in Teams. It's also forms behind the scenes, right? Like it's arbitrary. That does come at an added cost, and Topics comes at an added cost. But if you purchase SharePoint Syntex, you can get, that's the cost that you're paying for, is the ability to use a feature that's built into SharePoint Syntex, which is part of SharePoint, not a Viva deliverable. So it was kind of interesting to see the questioning of, wait, you're now going to put this behind a paywall and the people who have Yammer aren't going to be able to use Viva Engage? And the clear answer to that was no. If you have Yammer in your license, you have Viva Engage. And that's perfectly valid, but it just shows the licensing complexity that is now being created with this complex new brand that isn't really necessary to get the point across. At least I don't see so. And it just adds to that confusion that's out there. And I've spent a lot of time complaining about how Power Platform has the most complex licensing model I've ever seen, and their 35 page dissertation that it takes to understand it. Viva took that and said, challenge accepted. Let's see if we can make this even more complex. Now, they haven't gotten there yet. Power Platform, yes, I agree. Power Platform is still more complex than Viva when it comes to licensing and figuring out what things are. But Viva is definitely in a race with it, and it's working on trying to catch up, and I don't understand why.
It's so funny because it's like Power Platform definitely has the most convoluted and complex licensing structure. and it's frustrating to a large amount of people because a lot of people use the Power Platform. Something interesting in the keynote, and you pointed this out, Satya is, going through talking about Viva the platform, or Viva the concept, and he throws up a slide that said 1,000 organizations are currently using Viva, and both you and I were kind of like,
yeah,
1,000, which alone in a complete vacuum, if
right.
Matt, if I came to you and I said, hey, I built this cool thing, and 1,000 people use it, you'd be like, that's a good amount.
Right.
1,000 people on average watch our videos. That's a good amount. 1,000 companies out of the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of individual customers that use Microsoft 365. Only 1,000 of them, and they clarified this in a breakout. Chris,
finally,
out.
right?
Yeah. Thanks for taking this up out of a breakout session. 1,000 paying customers,
right?
Because we're all using Viva like connections, just by default if you use SharePoint.
Well, so SharePoint plus Yammer. I mean, even that. I mean, you're giving it a little bit more credit than maybe what they actually have. But for connections, if you have communities, now going to be, and now Viva Engage is part of Viva Connections. It's like a sub tier when you think about it. But if you have Communities app and Home app installed to Teams, you are by default using Viva Connections. You may not call it that. You may not have any idea that it also is known as that, but you are a Viva Connections customer at that point. There's no way that there's only 1,000 organizations out there that have done that. There have to be tens of thousands that have done that because it's so useful. Also, if you how many companies are using Yammer? I mean, a lot, but definitely not as many as are using SharePoint. So really the holdout is going to be Yammer. But I think the point there was the customers out there that are, I'm assuming that collection of 1,000 was this customer might have a couple licenses or 10,000 licenses to Viva Learning, or might have a couple or 10,000 licenses to Viva Topics and any of the other Viva modules that happen to have licenses. And I assume that 1,000 is a sum of all the companies that happen to have at least one paying customer inside of them for one of the Viva modules. That's still pretty small because like Viva Topics is pretty useful. And very cool if you're willing to pay that $5 a month per user. I think that's what it is. Price tag. But 1,000 is a really small number in my mind.
It's so small, and it speaks to this broader question of they're investing a ton of time and a ton of effort and a ton of marketing capital to broadcast Viva. 1,000 companies are paying money, and sure, some of them are probably massive, maybe. At what point does paywalling these features become fruitless? Because people are like, no, I appreciate, Topics is a great example. That's a really cool enhancement. You gain access to an entirely new SharePoint search experience. But if only 500 of your customers or however many are taking advantage of that, what's the point? And more importantly, for those customers, what's the concern that these, systemic changes that you're putting into place are going to be worth it? Because Microsoft might just sunset this kind of a feature because nobody's using it.
So I think Topics is a good example because you don't have to get the KM benefits of, say, Topics only from Topics. Like you can get SharePoint Syntex and get a bunch of the AI modeling stuff and apply that to your invoicing and, having automatic metadata applied and things like that. That's still a separate service than Viva Topics, but you can get Topics features by having Syntex licenses. You might get other things. You might pay a little bit more. I don't remember exactly what the licensing model is. I just don't understand why they use this number. That 1,000, to your point, you're saying like that's, why even push the marketing? Why even tell us that it's 1,000? Because that number is so low. It's an arbitrary number. You don't have to report it out. If you're proud of it, I don't know if that number is worth being proud of personally. Talk about how many people are using Viva and say that there's 75,000 organizations using Viva in general, because that's a number. It's a pretty impressive number, right?
Sure.
And it's a little bit misleading. I would, if that were the number they said, I'd probably still be poking them about the fact that like really all you have to do is use Yammer and SharePoint together in Teams, and that's Viva. That's a Viva license right there, right? Or that's one Viva organization. So either way, I'd probably throw my cynical viewpoint onto it. But the point is, like, why even talk about the 1,000? That just makes the organization look like it just shows that it's that harder to push this Viva branding, which in theory was supposed to be all about employee experience and getting the people in HR. And if an organization has an employee experience department, which most don't yet, they're maybe legal, their communications folks, and get all those people so that you can speak to them in something that's not IT speak. It doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot because you're not getting, and like knowledge management, information management organizations for topics, right? Doesn't seem like you're getting a whole lot of buy-in from those people if you only have 1,000 across the entire ecosystem at this point. And Viva's been around now for 1.5 years-ish, probably, if not more. At least something has been named Viva at least once. So yeah, it's I don't know, man.
It speaks a lot. It speaks volumes to what Microsoft considers success in Viva to be, which is money. And so the fact that they're considering only 1,000 customers as Viva customers speaks volumes.
Yeah. I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of close out with a bit of a hot take. So you had made the prediction at one point that you thought the Yammer brand is going to go away. And then Steve came in and said, nah. I'm going to make an equally risky hot take here. Because Viva, for the most part, is a Teams-specific experience, and the Microsoft Teams brand is like universally seen as bad, right? Like it's just so hard to explain it and say Teams team or the Teams did, right? Except for the outlier where they've referenced now, and I think I've only seen it in the Inspire announcements, although I could very well be missing other references where Outlook happens to be an entry point for like Viva Engage or maybe another Viva module. I'm wondering if maybe this is some sort of slow burning way to make Viva be seen as sort of the new Teams experience. And eventually Teams will just change its name to Viva. And don't get me wrong, that would have a huge impact on a lot of things, but they've done other things that have been interestingly impactful. And I'm wondering if this is some sort of, slow but steady direction towards saying, yeah, that whole Teams thing wasn't necessarily the best word to use. And we're saying that Teams is the new OS. And what is your OS at work, but your life at work? And what does Viva mean? It's a Latin sourced word for life. And I don't know.
I think there's something there. I like whether it's a full rebrand of Teams in the immediate, but I would, I don't know. But that's fascinating. I would bet, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to schedule an email with this episode link to come back to us in 2 years. I would be fascinated to see how that plays out.
Yeah. And I really think that's a hot take. It probably won't happen, but I am just so suspicious that might be. Right. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just that, do we really have to go through all of this confusion and complexity to get to that endpoint? Because it seems like a lot of confusion and customer complaints and whatnot just to get to a point that the person that would make this call probably hasn't told anybody that they would do it, right? Like it's going to be not only is it like NDA, but it's not even being talked about internally because the person pushing those buttons or leading that branding effort internally is literally just doing it here. And at the point when it's now time to do it, this is like, some master plan, then that person releases that change to their underlings and says, okay, now go do this.
This has been the plan all along.
Right, exactly. Exactly. You all hated Teams. We gave you something new. You asked for it. And it's like, yeah, but we didn't ask for that process to get there, right? Like you could have just pulled the Band-Aid off 3 years ago.
You heard it here first, folks. The inevitable either Teams rebrand or it's going to be a layer on top of the Teams experience so they can finally charge people for Teams because they gave it all away for free to kill Slack, which they didn't do.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. I mean, you already have to be a paying customer. They could just raise prices. Like that's still just as a legitimate, response to this is just raise prices because you're already in, those contracts come up and what are people going to do? Leave? Like you could, but it's not like back in the day when Google offered, all of their services for free to education. And then a number of years later, they started to actually, charge. There's a big difference between free and $5 a month or $12 a month versus going from $10 a month to $12 a month, right? Like,
sure. Raise prices in this economy?
Who would ever think to raise prices in an economy like this? That is a very fair point. But all right, cool. Well, I think that about does it. Thank you, Sean, for a good overview of what happened in Inspire. I know we mentioned in the last episode that we were looking forward to a special guest. We will be doing that in August. So we'll be talking about some cool things in the Power Platform space, and hopefully found some value out of this session. And check back with us in August as we go through again the roadmap recap, teams recap, special guest, and our Power Platform showcase. So as always, a like and subscribe is much appreciated. Leave a comment below to start that discussion. And Sean, thanks so much for joining me again this week. And I can't wait to hang out with you and everybody else again next week.